Hi, everyone. I am Stacey Arthur. I'm joined by my teammates Brent Brady, Landon Bybee, and Tyler Olson. And today we're going to talk through the functions of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, otherwise known as EXIM, and other multinational banks. So what is EXIM? They're an independent executive branch agency. They were formed to provide financial support to help American businesses compete globally. They don't compete with private sector, so rather they actually fill a gap when private sector won't take on a loan because it's too risky. The EXIM will step in and provide that service. The bank's operation requires continual congressional authorization, so they do have to continue that so the bank can keep operating, and there's no cost to U.S. taxpayers. And the EXIM is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, which gives them the power to do what they do, which I'll talk through in just a few minutes. So a brief history where EXIM came from. It was founded in 1934 by Franklin D. Roosevelt through an executive order. So that was right at the tail end of the Great Depression, and again, formed to really help U.S. businesses succeed in the global market and be able to export to other countries. They were made an independent agency in 1945 by Congress, and there have been some recent struggles with that reauthorization. Even in 2015, there were 5 months where the bank could not take on any new business, but only service their existing portfolio. But in 2019, the bank was authorized for a good length of period until 2026. So EXIM helps exporters in a variety of ways. I'm going to talk through these briefly just to give you an idea of some of the financing services they provide. So working capital loan guarantee. So how that would work is they would actually provide financing to a business to finance all the things that would be necessary to export goods. So it could be materials or labor, even the purchase of U.S. made products, and they would finance all of that. Export credit insurance. So this would cover non-payment. So if a foreign entity was not able to pay, this credit insurance would cover that. And also with this kind of guarantee that foreign payments would be taken, the credit insurance gives the business the opportunity to use their accounts receivable because those are guaranteed. So they can use those accounts receivable to finance and do other things. Project and structured financing. So this would be financed for foreign buyers, and it covers a variety of different industries, including energy, technology, and infrastructure. Transportation finance is what it sounds like: planes, trains, anything related to transportation that would finance, and it's generally done via loan guarantees. And then financing for foreign buyers. So direct loans would actually be given to foreign buyers so that they would have the money to purchase American goods, and they'll also insure private loans on that front. So sometimes it's direct, and sometimes they'll insure the private loan. I wanted to share this quote before I pass it on to Brent. This quote is from Boam, and it says, "With 95% of our customers located overseas, competitive export financing is critical to maintaining a level playing field." So I thought that was pretty poignant coming from a company as large as Boeing. And I believe we'll be talking through some of the controversies and risks with some of these companies using the financing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Brent to start diving into those topics. Brent?
Proponents of the EXIM Bank will claim that it is a small business oriented, filling an important gap for businesses that want to export to other countries but can't get the credit secured with a traditional bank. Last year, it appears to have done so with over 90% of transactions and 66% of the authorized dollar amount supporting small businesses. The bank estimates that these additional exports have directly supported over 1.7 million domestic jobs in the last decade alone. Another argument is that it provides additional revenues to the taxpayers. Since 2005, EXIM has returned $3.4 billion to the U.S. Treasury after adjusting for operating costs and defaults. As a result of the impact that the bank has on U.S. global exports, more than 70 other countries have done the exact same thing and set up export credit agencies to operate in their country's interest. Critics of the EXIM Bank, on the other hand, will claim that it's an overextension of big government. They view the low interest rates and favorable credit to foreign companies as just another form of corporate welfare. Others call it a subsidy in disguise, as the money is used to fund the bank has a greater opportunity cost if it was used somewhere else. Although the EXIM will claim that they are a small business-oriented bank, the flow of cash clearly indicates that the biggest winners are actually only a small handful of large companies. According to the EXIM Inspector General, there's also lots of internal controls and weaknesses in the governance that could lead to malfeasance or even some cases of fraud. They also raise concern as to inappropriate risk modeling that could increase the number of defaults. This would be especially true if there's a global economic crisis. Finally, the critics view this program as hurtful to other companies and industries that aren't benefiting. A few get some of the benefits, while many others may suffer from the ripple effects. In the case of Delta Airlines, they were a large recipient of these ripple effects. In fact, so much to the point that they've spent at least $10 million on lobbying to try to eliminate the Export-Import Bank since 2012. And Delta claims that when Boeing uses the Export-Import Bank with foreign airlines, that these airlines can receive more favorable credit terms and an overall much lower cost for their aircrafts. Delta believes that this has allowed competitors like Korean Air and Etihad Airlines to become unfairly competitive on their international routes. Although the case was eventually thrown out in 2015, it did raise some questions. How many other markets has the EXIM hurt U.S. companies by providing lower costs to foreign competition?
All right, so now we're going to talk about the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank assists its members and partners by providing loans, technical assistance, grants, and equity investments to promote social and economic development. It was originally started much smaller, but now it's grown to over 68 countries. It was founded on December 19th in 1966. And as far as the shareholders of the bank, there's several, but the top 5 is what I'll highlight here. And it's first Japan, United States, China, Indonesia, and then Australia. The top 5 borrowers as of recent, or who has the most kind of outstanding debt, is first China, and then India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. The Asian Development Bank projects. So these are all focused on the prosperity, the inclusiveness, sustainability, and resilience of these countries, especially countries that are low economic or having some issues financially. And so this is where the bank steps in to help. The funding, when it originally started, was primarily focused on these countries. However, over time, it's grown from just the development of countries, but to also develop these countries through the private sector as well. So as of recent, the funding has kind of shifted to about a 50% mix in private versus going directly to these countries. The recent example of one of these private investments that they did is there was a loan provided to a pharmaceutical group to help combat the coronavirus that's currently being faced over the seas and here. So within the Asian Development Bank, there's the Asian Development Fund. And so what the fund does is it's primarily focused on lower income developing member countries. So it was established in 1974. The activities supported by the ADF promote poverty reduction and improvements in the quality of life in the poorer countries of the Asia and Pacific region. So the Asian Development Fund is, instead of the loans that it's giving, the bank is giving to the private sector or some countries, this is specifically set aside as grants to these lower income developing members. Now let's talk about the World Bank. So the World Bank has 2 goals primarily. So first is to end extreme poverty, and then the second is to promote shared prosperity in a sustainable way. The World Bank started much smaller, but has now since grown into 189 countries. It's located in Washington, D.C., and it was established in July in 1944. The World Bank is comprised of 5 internal organizations, which we'll cover here now. So the first is IBRD, which IBRD lends to low and middle income countries. Then there's the International Development Association, or IDA, and this lends to low income countries, so it's similar to IBRD. And then we have the International Finance Corporation, or IFC, and they lend to the private sector. And then the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which encourages private companies to invest in foreign countries. And then lastly, we have the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, or the ICSID. And this helps private investors in foreign countries work out differences when they don't agree. The World Bank, how it's set up is it has its leaders, and these leaders are elected officials. So the leaders are the ones that determine kind of the loan amounts and the contingencies of the loan. They're in leadership because of the voting that had occurred. And as far as countries that have the largest voting power, first it's the United States, then Japan, China, Germany, and France. You can see a picture of there. This is the bank's most current president. And as far as the debt or countries that are currently using the World Bank the most, the highest debt as of 2019 was Peru, followed by India, China, Indonesia, and Ukraine. So we covered two banks here. We covered the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. But there are several other banks similar to these throughout the world. There's the African Development Bank, the Eurasian Development Bank, among many others.
Thank you, Landon. So to wrap our presentation up, I'm going to discuss the EXIM Bank under the past two administrations, President Obama and President Trump. In 2009, EXIM adopted a carbon policy, which encompassed all of the companies that it lended to. So in order to get lending from the EXIM Bank, you needed to have and meet their carbon policy requirements. In 2011, EXIM Bank authorized $32.7 billion in loans, an all-time record. And I want to draw your attention to that number because in the next slide, I'm going to show, in contrast, the amount authorized under President Trump's administration. In 2012, EXIM Bank authorized its single largest loan ever, a $4.9 billion loan for a petrochemical project in Saudi Arabia. And in 2015, the EXIM Bank experienced a lapse in charter and operating authority from the government. They went 5 months with no funding and without operating, the longest amount of time in the history of the EXIM Bank. Now, under President Trump's administration, interestingly enough, when he was elected in 2016, he initially wanted to close EXIM Bank. So President Trump nominated Scott Garrett from New Jersey to lead EXIM Bank, but Scott Garrett was a known and outspoken critic of the EXIM Bank. So many found it very interesting that he would nominate him, and many viewed it as a way for President Trump to get somebody inside of EXIM Bank to ultimately shut it down. Well, Scott Garrett failed to pass the Senate nomination process, which left EXIM Bank without leadership for over a year. So they had an acting president of the bank for over a year. Now, sometime in 2018 or 2019, President Trump reversed his views on the EXIM Bank. We're not really sure what led to that, but it certainly reversed in a big way, because in 2019, in an unprecedented move, President Trump renewed it for 7 years. So, for example, under President Obama, it was renewed for two-year periods. But under President Trump, he renewed it for 7 till 2026, which was really seen as unprecedented. And something else to note about the EXIM Bank is its current leadership. So, since Scott Garrett failed to be nominated, President Trump's second nominee, Kimberly Reed, she passed the nomination process in the Senate. And it's important because she's the first female to lead the bank, which is really great to see. The EXIM Bank current focuses are in India, Africa, and China. And again, and I wanted to draw attention to President Obama's number. In 2018, the year for which the data is provided, is $3.2 billion in authorized loans. So a really big difference compared to the 2011 number. So that wraps up our presentation. We look forward to your questions and comments in the discussion board and hope you enjoyed our presentation. Thank you.